Coming up on KCCI 8 News Close Up, after 7 years in office, Adam Gregg is no longer Iowa's lieutenant governor. Why he resigned and what comes next. Ruth Harkin, wife of longtime U.S. Senator Tom Harkin, gives a behind-the-scenes look at her life and legacy, both personal and professional. What's included in her new memoir and the message she hopes readers take away. And it's less than 2 months until the general election. Who's on the ballot and what Iowa voters need to know.
This is Iowa's news leader. This is KCCI 8 News Close Up.
Good morning, and thanks for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. I'm Chief Political Reporter Amanda Rooker. Last week, Iowa's Lieutenant Governor Adam Gregg announced he is leaving the position to focus on his family. Governor Kim Reynolds says she will not immediately appoint a new lieutenant governor. That decision will come after she returns from her trade mission to India, but no timeline exactly on when. Reynolds told reporters that she does, quote, have a couple people in mind to fill that position, but did not say who she's considering. According to Iowa law, Reynolds does have the power to choose a new lieutenant governor to replace Gregg. Gregg's term would have been up in January 2027. Iowa law says whoever Reynolds appoints will serve the remainder of that term. The law also says that Senate President Amy Sinclair is next in line of succession until Reynolds appoints a new lieutenant governor. That means if Reynolds was no longer able to serve as governor, Sinclair would take over until the next election. Reynolds says she'll keep in touch with Sinclair as she does with all Republican leaders at the State House.
Those communication lines are in place, and it'll be business as usual. You know, we'll continue to do what we've been doing, continue to work on getting ready for the next legislative session, which is going to be here really quickly too. And first and foremost, really looking for the right person to serve with me through the next 2 years, and we'll see what happens after that.
Reynolds was also asked what qualities she's looking for in the next lieutenant governor. She told reporters, quote, the list is long. Well, we are now less than 2 months away from the general election, and with control of the U.S. House and Senate up for grabs, Iowa's congressional races are in the spotlight. These are all of the Republicans and Democrats that are on the November ballot in each of Iowa's 4 U.S. House districts, and those seats are all currently held by Republicans who are all running for re-election. Now, these are the 3 Libertarian candidates who want to be on the ballot. A state panel recently voted that the Libertarian Party of Iowa did not follow the right rules to nominate its candidates and kicked all 3 off the ballot. The Libertarian Party of Iowa says it was a technical error in asking a district court to overturn the ruling. The Secretary of State's office says it won't certify Iowa ballots until there's clarification from the courts. Well, the future of those 3 Libertarian congressional candidates being on Iowa ballots is now in the hands of a Polk County District Court judge. A state panel wanted them removed from the November ballot due to that technical error during the party's summer convention. The Polk County District Court Judge Michael Huppert will decide if those candidates will be on the ballot and listed as candidates for the U.S. House of Representatives. Again, that state panel ruled that they violated Iowa law this summer by holding their caucus and convention on the same day. The panel then ruled that those Libertarian names should be removed. The Libertarians say the state panel is acting like a, quote, bully and does not have the authority to remove them, that the state was not injured by the irrelevant violation, but that Libertarians will be injured.
The harm to their substantive rights is substantial. Their voters no longer would have the option to vote for them. This is not just a technicality. This is a the problem here that the petitioners and the Libertarian Party failed to do goes to the heart of our election integrity and transparency.
The judge did not rule at last week's hearing, but time is running out to allow the Iowa Secretary of State enough time to certify ballots for the fall election. We will certainly be watching that closely. I want to bring in KCCI political analyst Dennis Goldford. Always great to have you with us, Dennis. Well, there's a lot to talk about with this election, but I want to zero in on Iowa's congressional races. What significance do those races have this election?
Well, whoever wins control of the House of Representatives in November, which, as you said, is a short time away from us now, it's likely to have a very narrow margin of victory. And so every single race matters. And so Iowa, of course, has 4 congressional seats. We're down from, used to be 6 in the 1980s. So we've lost congressional seats. But we have 4 representatives, as you noted at the top. They're all Republicans. And again, both parties see two of those in particular as really important to retain control of.
And we've seen Republicans right now have a slim majority in the U.S. House, but we have seen how that has played out with so much stagnation, so much division. Clearly, both parties really want to win a large majority this November. We also have a presidential race that's going to be at the top of the ticket. How do you see that influencing the congressional races here in Iowa?
Typically, when you have a presidential election in a given election year, like 2020, 2024, 2028, you have higher turnout across the board. When you have a so-called midterm election, it's an even-numbered year like 2018, 2022, turnout isn't as high because there's no presidential race on the ballot. Now, typically in Iowa, certainly older people take voting more seriously than younger people. Republicans take voting more seriously than Democrats. But Iowa overall has pretty good turnout in general. But still, we would have an increase in turnout here in Iowa compared to 2022 because there's a presidential race this year.
And as you mentioned, right now, Iowa has an all-Republican delegation. Obviously, they want to keep that. Democrats want to flip some of those seats. What are the messages you're expecting Republicans and Democrats to try to really push forward to flip, some of those or to hold those seats?
Well, it used to be said that all elections are local. The president is the closest thing we get to a nationwide election, even though it's not truly a national election. We don't elect the president with the popular vote. It's state by state. But typically, we always thought that for congressional races, senatorial or especially congressional, the House, those were essentially local. But over the last decade, more or less, with the rise of social media and the increase in the number of different outlets by which people can communicate and organize, our elections have become very national, and so you hear national themes even in local elections. There'd be concern, of course, here in Iowa with educational issues, agricultural issues, the economy in general, but you also hear issues that really are across the board in the nation as a whole.
The other piece to this is you have 4 incumbents that are all running for re-election. What angle does that, provide for this?
Typically, if an incumbent is scandal-free, and if the election that first put that incumbent in office wasn't an unusual one because of something else going on in the country, incumbents tend to have an advantage. By definition, they're reasonably well known because they're already holding office. The difficulty for a challenger to an incumbent, and we see that in many cases here in Iowa, is they're not as well known and they have to introduce themselves to that electorate, whereas the incumbents already had success in that electorate. So incumbents tend to have a bit of an advantage. Doesn't always work, but it certainly helps.
I want to talk to you about each of these individual congressional races. We can shift our focus now to District 1, where we have Mariannette Miller Meeks, the Republican, Christina Bohannon on the ballot, also Nicholas Gluba, the Libertarian candidate running. Notably, Mariannette Miller Meeks and Bohannon ran against each other last election, and Miller Meeks won. Is there anything you're watching for in this District 1 race?
Well, District 1 is one of the 2 races here in Iowa that the national parties are very interested in holding because they see it as vulnerable. Miller Meeks won last time around with about 53+% of the vote. And typically we say that anytime in a 2-person race, if the winner wins with less than 55% of the vote, it was a competitive election. The loser really did have a reasonable chance of winning. So Miller Meeks won by maybe a half dozen percentage points, 53 to 47, something like that. I'm sure she'd like a little more breathing room this time around if she can get that. But still, you have a rematch. Sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't, to the benefit of the challenger.
Yeah, and to that point, is there anything that has changed between 2022 and 2024 that could be helpful for either of them in terms of climate or issues? Or is there anything that maybe Bohannon learned from losing last time that she could change, in this upcoming election?
Well, I've not talked to that campaign, so it's hard to say in that regard. But you hope that various campaigns learn lessons. You may learn the lesson and go away and never show up again. You may learn a lesson and try to fight again the next time. Typically, as we've talked about for a long time, as you know, it's always a matter of turnout. And Democratic registration tends to be down statewide and in the districts anyway, but they've got to turn out all of their people. And even with Republicans, there's always room for more people to turn out that actually do. So the job for both parties is to get their supporters mobilized and enthusiastic and willing to turn out to vote. That's especially important for a challenger.
Absolutely. And what's interesting to me that the national Democrats are investing in this first district race. What help does that provide to have the national arm zeroing in on your race, providing help?
Money, 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 right? That's the main thing. Money is necessary to be successful in elections. It's not sufficient. It may not guarantee you success, but it's hard to win without it. And to the extent that national groups, the DNC, the RNC, or other particular groups, political action committees, are interested in a particular race, like the first or the third, they help provide money. And so the candidate, in a way, is freed up from having to pay for that kind of advertising, and is simply a political action committee or another group exercising what's typically judged by the courts to be their free speech rights. So to the extent that there's a focus on particular districts by people outside of the state, that helps provide the money, which provides the TV ads, which certainly helps, doesn't hurt.
Well, Dennis, thank you. Still to come on Close Up, we will talk about Iowa's 3rd district, another competitive race in Iowa. We'll be right back after this break. Welcome back to Close Up. I'm here with KCCI political analyst Dennis Goldford talking about this general election that is now less than 2 months away. I want to talk to you about what could be considered, what is considered the state's most competitive House race. Iowa's 3rd district, District 3, covers a large part of the Des Moines area, including Polk and Dallas counties. Democrat Lennon Bacom is challenging Republican incumbent Zach Nunn. Marco Battaglia is the Libertarian running in this district. Dennis, you've said, this is all eyes really are on, they're on District 1 and District 3 in terms of the competitiveness. What are you watching in this 3rd district race?
The question is how well Democrats can mobilize to take on Zach Nunn. Congressman Nunn is in his 1st term. And we've already noted that the others are all in their 2nd term running for a 3rd, the Republicans. And typically, we don't really know if someone in his 1st term is there as a fluke. I mean, Nunn upset in a very close race by about 2,100 votes Cindy Axne before. Was that a fluke, or does that show some real staying power? So that first re-election race, which is what Nunn is facing right now, is always a tough one. And so we see certainly here in central Iowa and KCCI and other TV outlets just a huge number of ads on behalf of Nunn, either by himself or by groups supporting him. And so, well, it'll be interesting once we find out the outcome of the election and do the postmortems to see what kind of money's been spent on that. But it certainly looks like a race that's had a ton of money spent on it. And the question then is, how has Nunn positioned himself? If you look at some of his ads, he's trying to sound like a fairly moderately conservative Republican, trying to bring people together. In other ads, he seems to be running the kind of national Trumpian kinds of ads based upon fear of illegal immigrants and the question of the economy and things like that. So we might ask which Zach Nunn will show up, so to speak, on Election Day.
Sure, and whether or not that plays to the different types of voters that are in that district.
Right.
Part of that I wanted to ask you about this district. What counties are you looking at? I know there is Polk, obviously, which there's a big urban population, but there's also a big rural population in this district.
Right. Again, another one of these big divisions in the country now is the urban-rural division. We've always had that, but at the same time, we certainly see that here in Iowa. And we talked about the 6 most urban counties in the state. They were Black Hawk, Lynn, and Dubuque in the 2nd district, Scott and Johnson in the 1st district, and Polk in the 3rd district. And Democrats used to rely on those counties for sufficient margins to overcome their deficit in the more rural areas of the state. Well, they don't have those margins in those more urban counties anymore. And in the 3rd district, used to be the 4th, was always anchored around Polk County, that urban core with a strong Democratic base. That's been diluted since the last redistricting took effect in 2022 to make it more rural, and that's been to the advantage of Republicans. So will Polk County turn out sufficiently for Democrats to help defeat Nunn, or will that strength he has in more rural areas, and probably also in Dallas County as well, will that see him through?
Dennis, thank you. Straight ahead, we're breaking down Iowa's District 2 and District 4. We'll be right back after the break. Welcome back to Close Up. Our conversation about the general election continues with KCCI political analyst Dennis Goldford. Thanks for being here. We now want to talk about Iowa's 2nd and 4th congressional districts, starting with Iowa's 2nd district, that is Northeast Iowa. Ashley Hinson, Republican incumbent, running for re-election. She's facing Democrat Sarah Corkery. Anything in particular stand out to you about this race?
Well, it's another uphill battle for Democrats. The second, as we talked about earlier, does have 3 of those 6 more urbanized counties in the state, Dubuque, Lynn, and Blackhawk. But obviously it hasn't saved Democrats from defeat by Republicans in recent races. Hinson, by all accounts, is doing an acceptable job, certainly, as Congresswoman from that district. It's not, at this point, unless something changes in the last month or two, considered to be one of the most competitive districts in the country. The difficulty for Democrats in that district, as in any of the districts really around the state, especially the 4th, as we'll note in a moment, is again that urban-rural divide. And the problem for Democrats is that they've lost the ability to talk to people in more rural areas, to get a hearing from them. And so Democrats are struggling in the 2nd district as well as all the others, and especially the 4th.
Yeah, when I talked to you about that 4th district as well, I did want to note that Jody Maldon Puffett is also on the ballot as an independent in District 2. Now, moving to District 4, that historically has been an extremely Republican-held district. You know, we see Randy Feenstra, a Republican incumbent. We see Democrat Ryan Melton, who ran against Randy Feenstra, lost to Randy Feenstra in 2022. We also see Libertarian candidate Charles Aldrich, who's trying to get on the ballot in this congressional race. What are you looking at in the 4th district?
The question there is how much of a showing can Democrats make in the 4th, knowing that it's, if not straight up, it's certainly strongly uphill. And this is the old area represented by Steve King before Feenstra, again with the district somewhat drawn differently. But one of the ways you can notice how rural the district is to look at how many counties are in the 4th district, because with a reapportionment, in principle, every congressional district in a state is supposed to have the same population. And I think, I don't have it top of my head here, you need 30 some odd counties in the 4th to get as many people as maybe 16 counties in the 3rd. So population is spread out pretty thinly there. But for those with longer memories, you have to remember that when Iowa had 6 congressional districts, at least until after the 1990 census, the 4th was what we now call the 4th, was represented by Berkeley Bedell, a conservative Democrat.
Sorry to cut you off
Sure.
there. We will for sure talk more about Iowa's 4th district, but that is all the time that we have for today. Dennis, thanks for joining us.
My pleasure.
Well, still to come on Close Up, an inside look at Ruth Harkin's new memoir, the stories behind her and her husband's careers. That's coming up after the break. Ruth Harkin, wife of former U.S. Senator Tom Harkin, recently launched her memoir, When My Husband Ran for President and Other Short Stories. I sat down with her to talk about her life and legacy and the message she hopes readers take away. Ruth Harkin's memoir provides a window into her and her husband's daily life, a compilation of stories she first wrote to pass down to her children and grandchildren. The book details how Ruth and Tom Harkin met, how their impressive careers took shape, and the adventures they've had along the way. When people read this book, what do you hope they take away?
Well, I hope they have a good time reading the book because it is funny, it is amusing, and I hope they identify with certain parts of it.
As the title implies, the memoir, When My Husband Ran for President and Other Short Stories, discusses Tom Harkin's short presidential bid and their family's experience on the campaign trail. It also highlights the decades that Tom spent in the U.S. Senate and his work on the Americans with Disabilities Act.
That is Tom's signature accomplishment when he was in the Senate. And it really was a civil rights bill for people who are disabled. That was a happier time in the Senate when everybody worked with everybody else regardless of party. That kind of bill right now could never be passed today.
Is there anything you hope that people take away from looking back to what that type of bipartisan work looked like back then?
Absolutely, and I hope we get back to it because it's more productive and it's a lot more fun.
Ruth Harkin has an incredible legacy on her own, separate from her husband's political career. She was elected to public office as the first female Story County attorney and has led a life of leadership and public service. She worked as deputy counsel for the U.S. Department of Agriculture and was appointed by President Bill Clinton to lead a government finance corporation. Now, what do you see as your own top accomplishment?
My ability to be in a room where I could make a difference for women. For example, when I became a deputy general counsel at the Department of Agriculture, we had a law firm of 240 lawyers. And one day I received a call from the general counsel of the vice president, and he said, I see that you're starting to hire women part-time. And I said, yes, I'm hiring women part-time because they want to stay in the workforce, but they're daunted by traffic, children, just working out their whole schedule. So I've created an opportunity for them to work part-time and stay in the workforce. And this person said to me, well, no one else is doing that. No one else is doing that. And I said, well, it's not illegal, is it? And he said, well, no. And I said, good, I'll keep doing it.
Her memoir's pages are filled with similar stories, highlighting Ruth's lifelong fight for women's rights. And it's those stories she hopes will drive readers to action and laugh along the way.
I hope it'll inspire people to do more and to make sure that we don't lose the freedoms we have, and particularly for women being under attack really in a lot of ways this year. I hope it will inspire people to move forward. And I also hope they have fun reading the book.
Thank you for joining us for KCCI 8 News Close Up. We'll see you back here next Sunday. Have a great day.